It's my pleasure to welcome with us today four very prominent politicians and civil society activists and democracy activists in Tunisia for the past decade or longer, actually, for most of them. We have four panelists. Let me introduce them very briefly. We have with us Madame Samira Shawashi. Madame Samira is Vice President of the Tunisian Assembly of People's Representative, which is the parliament in Tunisia. She has a degree in civic education and obtained a master's degree in law, but soon prioritized her involvement in public life. She has been active in politics since before the revolution. She joined the Free Patriotic Union in 2016 after the revolution, and then Qalb Tunis in 2019. And she was elected vice president to the parliament on November 2019. Welcome, Madame Samira. Our second panelist, we have Mr. Issam Shabi. Mr. Issam is the Secretary General of the Republican Al-Jumhuri Party and also former member of the National Constituent Assembly. So he was active in writing the 2014 Constitution. He is a human rights defender and a member of the Executive Committee of the PDP, which is the Democratic Progressive Party in Tunisia from 2004 until 2012. In 2011, he was elected as a member of the National Assembly, Constituent Assembly, tasked with writing the new constitution. And in 2017, he became the Secretary General of the Republican Party. Welcome, Issam. Marhaba bik.
Marhaba.
Our third speaker and panelist is Mr. Jawhar Ben Mbarak. Jawhar is a politician, human rights activist, and professor of constitutional law. He was very active in politics before the revolution, and after the revolution, he created Dusturuna Network, our constitution network. He is considered one of the most vocal opponents of the coup of July 25, and he is also a founder and spokesperson of the democratic initiative, the Citizens Against the Coup initiative, مواطنون ضد الانقلاب. And also is the founding member and a member of the executive committee of the National Salvation Front. And finally, we have Dr. Khalid Shoukat. Dr. Khalid is a politician, civil society activist, and president of the Arab Institute for Democracy. He was former minister, he was parliament, and he was one of the leaders of Nida Tunis party between 2014 until about 2019. He holds a PhD in international law and political science from Oujda University in Morocco and Leiden University in the Netherlands. He has published more than 10 books in the last 20 years, and he's very, very active in civil society organization. The Arab Institute for Democracy is a very active organization in Tunisia and across the Arab world. So we will give each panelist about 12 to 15 minutes to answer the questions that we have asked them to focus on. And namely, the four questions are: number one, has the presidential coup against democracy failed in Tunisia? And if so, what is the path forward for restoring democracy? Second question, what has been the role of the military and the security forces in the political process, and what can they play, and can they play a positive role in the future? Number three, can the opposition movements and parties overcome their differences and unite around a specific path for restoring democracy in the country? Can we see an agreement between all the various political parties on how to restore democracy in Tunisia? And finally, what is the role of the United States, the European Union, and the international community in general in supporting democracy and helping to provide a minimum of economic and political stability? So let us therefore start. Madame Samira Shawashi. Madame Samira, مرحبا بك. Also, we have interpretation. We have live simultaneous interpretation, so you can choose the language that you want, either English or Arabic. You click on the bottom of the screen. There is a button that says interpretation, and you choose the language that you want. Madame Samira, مرحبا بك. شرفتنا اليوم.
Welcome, Mrs. Samira. We are honored to have you with us this evening. We have around 15 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Radwan Masmoudi. Thank you to CSID for these opportunities that they provide us to communicate with your guests. Thank you, everyone. Of course, it is well known that the 25th of July 2021, what happened in Tunisia is a coup against the constitution, against legitimate institutions undertaken by the President of the Republic through an illegitimate interpretation of the constitution. The result is the destruction of institutions, the destruction of legitimacy, and all that could make of Tunisia a state that is able to fulfill the needs of its citizens. The coup has gone through a number of stages. It has used force to impose itself and imposed a roadmap which it expected to succeed, and expected that when the roadmap is imposed, it would be able to convince the world and Tunisians that what he had undertaken was a correction of the path of the democratic transition. And of course, we knew from the beginning, especially the voices that said from the beginning that what happened was a coup and that what happened is outside legitimacy. However, what has surprised everyone is that each step of this path, the Tunisian people sent a message to the coup, to President Saied, that is, that it has lost all hope and no longer believes the narrative presented to the Tunisian people on the day of the coup. The roadmap he adopted was based on a referendum on the constitution, on a constitution he had written himself to Tunisia 11 years after the revolution and democracy and democratic transition. We have one individual abrogating the constitution adopted by the majority and imposing his own constitution. The Tunisian people opposed him, but the turnout was very low, and this was the first message and the first failure. The second step was the first round of elections, which we, as the Tunisian opposition, we consider to be a slap in the face of the coup, because the turnout was a mere 8%, which was officially announced, but those who followed and observed the elections knew that it was in fact much lower than that. And this was another opportunity for the Tunisian people to send a message that they no longer have the same trust. The president was under the illusion that he had obtained on the 25th of July 2021. Now, the solution, we say, yes, we have said repeatedly that what he did was a destruction of what we had built over 11 years. And although that period was not all a complete success, nevertheless, we had built many democratic institutions and we were required to reform them and preserve them. How can we restore democracy? What do Tunisians have to do in order to return democracy to its correct path? Today, surely the roadmap in Tunisia, there is a difference among views within Tunisia, which is not far from the positions announced after the 25th of July. there are positions of principle, those who came out to say, yes, perhaps democracy was not in an ideal state, but what happened was a coup and is against the constitution. And there are others, of course, who found in what took place perhaps an opportunity to position themselves or an opportunity to get rid of a political rival. What we see today is we still see the same parties, even if they have developed their positions. Some of them have remained on the same positions with one important change, that is the expansion of the base around which are gathered those who want to go back to democracy, and a restriction with time, reduction of the voices calling for the support of this coup, or those who consider it an opportunity to go forward towards a new third republic or new political situation. There is evolution, the resistance against the coup, even if there isn't a united opposition, even if there is no, there are no voices that are now opposing the coup, even if they are not together in one uniting structure. What is important and what makes us optimistic about the opposition is that these oppositions, despite the differences, they are united in saying that this is a coup and that Tunisia, and maintaining Tunisia outside legitimacy and outside constitutional frameworks, is a danger for Tunisia and makes Tunisia at risk of violent social uprisings. Regarding the role of the army in protecting democracy, I personally, we have always said that the national army, since the revolution, in this democratic transition, this change in political life in Tunisia has enabled it to achieve a number of privileges. There is trust that has been built between the Tunisian people and the army institution. There is also perhaps a will from everybody to make the security forces to be at the service of the people. However, unfortunately, this coup has instrumentalized these two institutions by, perhaps because the one who undertook the coup is the head, the leader of the military forces, although this does not allow him to order the army to dismiss the government or close the parliament. But I say that the national army, whenever it sees that there is a danger facing social national peace, it will intervene. The national army, when it sees that the Tunisian street, the majority are against the coup, particularly as we believe that things have evolved and changed from a position of principle on the 25th of July to this day. There has been an evolution and development in this stance, which is supported by the fact that Mr. Kais Saied used to enjoy electoral constitutional legitimacy, but now what we see, this legitimacy has fallen in light of the fact that he has imposed a constitution, a one-sided constitution that is illegal, in addition to the fact that Mr. Kais Saied has lost all his legitimacy through the rejection of the Tunisian people to support him through these legislative elections in its first round. But what is worrying is that the coup authorities are going forward, are in a state of rejection of the reality in Tunisia. There is a very severe social and economic crisis. Tunisia has not achieved an agreement with the IMF, and we all know the very dangerous consequences for Tunisian economy and the lower social groups in Tunisia. However, unfortunately, the authorities are in denial regarding the opposition parties and organizations. Our hope has been from the first moment. We have said that this fragmentation in the components of the opposition to the coup may be harmful, may prolong the life of this coup. But now there is perhaps rapprochement in the position, and all forces, all parties, we cannot forget that in 2019 there were
انتخابات شفافة، وهذه الانتخابات كانت انتخابات يعني وقع الاعتراف بها طبعا من الداخل، هي كانت مسندة شعبيا ووقع الاعتراف بها من جميع المؤسسات التي كانت مراقبة لهذه الانتخابات. لا يمكن أن ننكر أن هنالك شرعية وقع عليها بفعل
that the legitimacy has been usurped through this coup, and those parties should have a role. And there has been a rapprochement of views between organizations and parties that oppose the coup, and everyone who knows today that Tunisia cannot continue in this situation of ambiguity and fragmentation. They are all now called upon to find common ground between everyone, where the first objective is to return Tunisia to institutions, not individuals. This is beyond individuals, beyond those voices that say the Tunisian people have rejected the pre-25th of July. And there were those voices who may have welcomed what happened on the 25th of July. Yes, we do not want to go to that same situation as it was. What we say today is that if there had been an imposed roadmap on Tunisia with the objective of defeating the coup, however, with the content accepting part of the coup and trying to find solutions in other aspects, this is dangerous. And I explained this by saying that there are now initiatives that want to take Tunisia out of the current situation, but by accepting what happened on the 25th of July and reforming what happened after that. For the first time after the revolution, there was the destruction of legitimacy in a way that we all agree was illegal. But those propose accepting the results of the coup. This is dangerous when we have the political elite is now at this crossroads. There are those who say that our democracy has had problems, we should correct them. However, to establish that for us after the revolution to talk about a force that illegally suspend democracy and for us to accept that, I see that as more dangerous than the coup, because this will not prevent continuous and successive coups in the future. As for the role of the international community, particularly the US and the European Union, their stances were perhaps they had their ups and downs. At some points, they were clearer and stronger and more explicit, and at other times, they were not so loud. Tunisia, in its relation with the international community, is only asking for this democratic world to be in harmony with its convictions and principles and coherent with its belief in universal values that we all believe in, all those who believe that democracy and human rights are essential in the relations between nations and peoples. We only ask those nations to be coherent in respect to these values that we agree on and to raise their voices. We have not heard any clear position saying that this is a coup. We ask for greater clarity in stances because today, in the first round of the elections, the EU was clear in its position by refusing to send observers, and the US, through some of the visits by high-level officials to Tunisia, have also expressed focus on human rights and freedoms in Tunisia. And on the basis, perhaps on the principle of respect of sovereignty, what we apply in relation to these relations is the application of the universal international accords and the decisions of international councils. We have not seen any insistence on the application of the verdict issued by the African court, which is binding according to the treaty signed by the Tunisian state. This verdict has ruled on the need to abrogate all the decisions and measures taken by Kais Saied after the coup, but we have not seen any international bodies insisting on the application of this verdict and on the return to legitimacy. Yes, democracy had its problems, and perhaps matters had reached a level of complexity, and there was a need to find a framework for dialogue. But what is certain is that what was needed was not a coup, was not to break the law and contravene the constitution. This is what I wanted to present to all the participants, and I am here ready to answer all your questions. Thank you, Madam Samira, for your valuable contribution. Now we go to Mr. Aitham Shebi, President of the Republican Party. If you can unmute yourself. Welcome, Mr. Aitham. Thank you, Mr. Radwan. I greet you and all the participants and those following the seminar organized by CSID, which is an opportunity to establish dialogue between Tunisians and those who are following what is happening in Tunisia, particularly in these difficult times through which our country is going. Mrs. Samira will means that I have to summarize what I have to say because I agree with most of what she has said. Mr. Kais Saied, yes, he came to power after free democratic elections rather than atop a tank. However, Mr. Kais Saied, after 1.5 years of coming to power through elections, has used military force to abrogate the constitution of the Second Republic that was adopted by Tunisians following free elections and broad dialogue and consultation to establish a new social contract, and on the basis of which Mr. Saied himself has been elected. Through this coup against the constitution and against legitimacy, which happened by exploiting a real crisis that was in Tunisia and the failure of previous governments to resolve social and economic problems and to achieve at least some of the aspirations of the Tunisian people. He exploited this crisis not to support democracy or reform the situation, but to usurp all powers and to dismantle all institutions that we had succeeded, despite everything, succeeded to build in Tunisia. And we were an exception in the region, and we hope to be a model in our region, in the Arab Muslim world. Mr. Saied, did his coup succeed? We can say that it has succeeded to destroy and undermine the constitutional independent institutions and to undermine the principle of separation and balance between powers by suspending the constitution and through his presidential decree number 117, which gave him all powers, allowing him to rule by decree which cannot be challenged, which went further than previous dictators in our country or our neighboring countries. He has succeeded to weaken the Tunisian state, to take Tunisia from an acute crisis to the brink of disaster. Now, 1.5 years after the coup, everybody agrees that our country is going through a severe financial crisis. There is an economic crisis that threatens the production systems in Tunisia. Tunisia is facing bankruptcy, and according to international reports and experts, Tunisia may be unable to repay its debts or provide the necessary resources for its budget. Mr. Saied has succeeded to unite all Tunisians against this dark tunnel into which he has pushed the country. His government, which has issued a budget recently, has been rejected by all unions, by the Chamber of Commerce, by all accountants, by parties, by civil society organizations. They have said that this government lacks any vision for reforming the economy, and through its budget, it shows that it lacks any vision for Tunisia, and this budget will deepen the crisis that Tunisia is witnessing. Unfortunately, Tunisia is a country where citizens are living as refugees in their own countries. Tunisians cannot find the basic commodities, which was something we had never experienced. Now people are fearing for their rights and freedoms following excessive restrictions on freedom of expression and association, because Mr. Saied has restricted Tunisians' right to freedom of movement, to travel without any judicial rulings. He has prosecuted judges, lawyers, bloggers, and activists. He has issued his infamous decree, which threatens to destroy the last remaining freedom, that is the freedom of expression. He wishes, in the face of the growth of opposition, political and popular opposition to his coup, he wishes to muzzle all voices. This coup does not possess any conditions for success. instead of adopting dialogue to face the problems that Tunisia is facing, Tunisia is now facing sure disaster and facing bankruptcy. The question is not whether the coup has succeeded, but the question is whether this coup can continue. And the answer, in my view, is rather complex because it depends on the will of the opposition forces, the democratic forces, to reach consensus on a roadmap and unify their positions, as Mrs. Samira has mentioned. The oppositions agree on the objective and on calling for a return to democracy, but what is required today for ending this coup is to move forward to unify their ranks, and the opposition, while preserving its diversity, is required to move beyond that, especially following the message sent by the Tunisian people in the so-called elections, where over 90% turned their backs to this farce. The civil forces are called to president call for his own all people for what is political forces to meet for preliminary consultations in order to prepare for a national dialogue to agree on a roadmap and a practical program for returning to democracy with all its details and steps and phases. We must send a message to Tunisians to give them hope that these parties that have been demonized by Mr. Kais Saied, whose leaders have been accused of treason, they are called upon to meet and unite themselves on what is in the interest of the Tunisian people. We do not deny our responsibility, particularly all the political disputes that were widened. However, now wisdom calls for moving beyond these disputes and focusing on saving Tunisia. And this is what would ensure the end of the coup. Today, Tunisians who have turned their backs to the coup are waiting for a clear political proposal that will pave the way to the restoration of democracy and for dealing with the economic and social difficulties, and to establish a national salvation government that will be tasked with the ending of the severe crisis facing the country, and which will focus on a new transition phase that will focus on uniting Tunisians, on activating the economy and leading the country towards free democratic elections based on the 2014 constitution, which can be amended through a national dialogue to ensure legal and political reforms that will ensure a new presidential and parliamentary early elections 2 days before the anniversary of the Tunisian revolution that had inspired the entire world, where a revolution which achieved unprecedented changes in Tunisian society. As we prepare to celebrate and commemorate this anniversary in activities and gatherings which will be the foundation for the uniting of the opposition, after which we need to start a new page and we need to address Tunisians and the whole world to show that there are political forces. There is no vacuum in Tunisia, as Kais Saied, there are forces that can agree and can save the state and can reform the Tunisian state. Regarding the position of the security, the interior ministry and the army in protecting democracy and the democratic transition, I say briefly that their role should be similar to that in the democratic nations. They should be neutral, and we should aim for them to be institutions that are tasked with protecting Tunisians and protecting freedoms, particularly to protect freedoms and impose the application of the law on everybody. And it is in their interests not to be implicated and involved in politics. The president, however, only has these institutions to impose his political vision, but we should not in any way involve this institution in our political disputes. We call upon them to maintain their neutrality, to continue to be institutions of the Tunisian state and the Tunisian people, and to protect it. And just as they did during the revolution, where the army was one of the guarantees of the Tunisian revolution, we should maintain that neutrality. Time is up. If you can, in 1 minute, regarding unity of parties, is it possible? I say it is required and it is necessary, and this is our responsibility. And I believe, and in the Republican Party, we are seeking to provide all the necessary conditions to ensure the unity of democratic parties, all those parties that wish to restore democracy and the rule of law and institutions. Regarding the international community, yes, in Tunisia we are an open country that has relations with everyone, and the world is watching Tunisia. What is required of those following the situation in Tunisia? It is to preserve cooperation and openness, because the mechanisms of the Cold War are over, and what is needed is to support Tunisia politically and economically, and not to sacrifice principles and values of democracy and human rights for the sake of immediate interests that may not be guaranteed. What is required, or for the international community, is to deal with Tunisia as a country that is in need of economic support, but it also needs support for its democratic process and to ensure the restoration of democracy, which will guarantee the stability of our country. Thank you, and I apologize for one. I have a question. Does your party call for the return to the 2014 constitution? In the face of the constitution, the principal document that symbolizes legitimacy is the 2014 constitution. If we let go or accept any contravention of this constitution, we would have embraced the coup. There are many initiatives for coming out of the crisis, which we welcome, but any initiative that tries to exclude political parties, or that is not on the basis of commitment to the 2014 constitution, or tries to address their initiatives to the president, they will only be a waste of time, precious time of the Tunisian people. The president is an obstacle in the path of the restoration of democracy, and we should elaborate our initiatives without the inclusion of the president. Thank you, Mr. Aysam. Now we go to Professor Jawhar bin Barak. Welcome. You have around 15 minutes. You can unmute yourself. Thank you, Mr. Radwan, for this invitation and providing this opportunity once again for dialogue and discussion among Tunisians, but also with our friends around the world, the friends of democracy in the US. I start with Tunisia. In 2 days will commemorate the anniversary of the revolution and the victory of the revolution on the 14th of January 2011. Of course, this anniversary is for the second time being commemorated in painful conditions. Also on the 14th of January last year, we commemorated it through protests where protesters were attacked by and where we lost a martyr, Rida Bouzayyan, and we saw painful scenes which we thought we would never see 10 years after the revolution, where we have martyrs and injured and detained protesters. This is a great setback for Tunisians, and have expected to see Tunisia returning to such scenes. Again, we will be commemorating the anniversary of the revolution on the Revolution Avenue, but in conditions where the coup is imposing itself on Tunisians. To describe reality, to say that Kais Saied has enacted a coup, this is not sufficient. We must first emphasize that Kais Saied's coup has not only suspended democracy, it has deprived the region, the Arab region, the Muslim world, from a democratic experiment, which could be the last one of the Arab Spring that was continuing of the Arab Spring, that provided hope not only for Tunisians, but for all Arab nations and Arab people. The Tunisian revolution and its success and continuation was a civilizational and regional achievement that was aborted by Kais Saied, who aborted the dreams of Tunisian women and men, and also the dreams of millions of Arabs. And now I will address the question of the failure of the coup. Has the coup fallen? In reality, it is a complex question and requires two perhaps contradictory answers. The coup has not fallen. However, the coup is retreating and losing spaces one day after another. There is a retreat of the coup. However, the coup still has conditions for continuity, even if they are temporary or conditional. Why do I say that it is retreating and losing in a very obvious and evident way? The main strength in Kais Saied's narrative when he did what he did on the 25th of July, his coup against the legitimate institutions of the state, was that he is applying the will of the people. He was hiding behind the will of the people, which could not be measured in any objective way, but he spread this narrative in Tunisia and around the world that he was supported by broad popular support. The coup is losing a lot of its popular support, and the evidence is the lack of participation in his electronic consultation, and low participation in his referendum on his constitution, even if we accept the officially announced results, and the very low participation in the so-called elections. Tunisians have shown that they are not ready to be implicated in this vision and this path. And also in terms of surveys and polls, which could not be published during the election period, these so-called elections, these polls prove the collapse of Kais Saied's popularity, and the principal cause is not only the growing political pressure against the coup, his failure to achieve economically, socially. There is a lot of problems and difficulties faced by Tunisians at the level of high prices, increased in unemployment, in terms of financial indicators, and almost bankrupt public finance. Also, Tunisians are suffering. There is a severe shortage in medicines and basic goods and very high prices. Of course, all this pushes Tunisians to discover gradually that what Kais Saied said, that the promises of Kais Saied were only populist illusions that have no basis, and he has no ability to apply them, all the promises of prosperity and fighting corruption and applying the law and establishing justice. All this has not been done. Kais Saied has not achieved any advances in any one of his promises. All the various fields in Tunisia that were in crisis, but 1.5 years after Kais Saied's dictatorship, he has not been able to solve any problems, and this has led to a collapse in his popularity. The second collapse is political. After the 25th of July, on the whole, after the 25th of July, yes, there were voices that opposed, that were loud and clear, who said that this is a coup, but this was restricted, and the majority of the political scene was tending towards supporting Kais Saied and the coup in various ways. There has been significant development in terms of political parties, trade unions, national organizations. Now, all unions consider Kais Saied to be taking us in the wrong direction. So Kais Saied has also lost here on the political level. He is isolated. He is not supported by anyone other than his coordination groups, these militias, and he's not supported by anyone other than small parties that are not representative or ideological parties, particularly Arab nationalist parties. Perhaps just 2 parties that support Kais Saied. Apart from that, he is completely isolated. Also, there has been a retreat of the coup at the economic level, at the level of public finance, particularly after the rising feeling of Tunisians that Tunisia is under international siege. There is no trust of international funders in the political environment in Tunisia, or at the level of clarity in terms of the economic vision. Kais Saied has lost, or his government has lost an agreement with the IMF. And the next year's budget as a whole had been built on the assumption that this loan would be provided in December, and now it has been indefinitely postponed, which will create a severe financial crisis, which is very dangerous and may lead, which we may see in the third quarter of 2023. Also, Kais Saied has obstructed local economic actors, whether through his utopian proposals, through his proposal for financial, which was a way to exploit and blackmail businesses, all through his so-called popular companies, which we can all label as utopian ideological projects, which contradict the general direction of the Tunisian economy, that is an open market society, thus disrupting production networks. These ideological proposals disrupted the Tunisian economy. There is no time here to talk about the increased taxes, which have risen further in the recent budget, which have placed further pressures on businesses. However, the coup has not fallen, because it still controls a number of important cards. The first is the apparatus, the military and the administration. The coup controls these institutions, and they are implicating these institutions in its decisions. Also, the Tunisian administration and the Tunisian economy, they are still operating under the control of the coup. The second element in these cards is popular support. To talk about the fall in his popularity does not mean that he has lost all popular support. He still has an important base. He has lost a lot of support to around 25% in some unannounced polls, which cannot be announced now during the elections, but can be published after the second round of the elections. The second card is regional support. There is regional support of Kais Saied's system and his coup, even if it is limited, but it is influential. Without going into details on the Algerian support, there is support from the Algerian presidency of Kais Saied, and Algeria is an important state regionally and a neighbor, major. Also support from France, which on the whole supports Kais Saied's so-called roadmap, which these are cards that Kais Saied can use, and they can obstruct any advance in the process of toppling him. The second reason for the continuity of the coup is the absence of a political condition for toppling Kais Saied that has not been achieved. That is to build a national alternative that is able to oppose the coup, and secondly, an alternative that can lead the situation and provide a clear vision, leadership, a credible alternative that can reassure Tunisians, actors and stakeholders and international stakeholders that Tunisia will not fall into a vacuum. Yes, there is development in this direction towards building this national alternative, a democratic alternative, but this is still a work in progress and requires more time. And without this fundamental condition, I do not believe that the coup will be toppled before that. This condition must be achieved, and this is the responsibility of the political class, and they must realize this responsibility, that their agreement, their unity is essential for saving Tunisia. It's a heavy responsibility on political parties. It is not an option here. It is a duty and a responsibility. How do we move towards that goal? We are going there through trial and error. The third point, and I go to the next, perhaps final question, regarding the continuity of the coup, lack of agreement in the political class and the opposition on a vision, on a roadmap that takes us out of the crisis, that enables that shows the political and technical possibility of coming out of the coup path. Until now, there is diversity in the various conceptions. There are differences. There is fragmentation of these initiatives. The diversity of initiatives is not negative in itself, but in the end, there must be one principal initiative, a central proposition that brings together the majority of the opposition to the coup, and it should be a national roadmap. There are many proposals from those that are based on turning a blind eye to the coup as if nothing had happened. We go back to the 24th of July 2021, based on the 2014 constitution, and we continue on that path to the other extreme, perhaps led by some organizations like the UGCT, and what we hear from that initiative is that they wish to improve, that they are within the framework of the 25th of July 2021. They call for governmental reforms. They call for broadening dialogue, to expand, to increase their participation and improve the image of the coup and limit the speed of its collapse. Perhaps they are preparing for another future phase, because even Kais Saied has not paid any attention to these initiatives either. So there are initiatives in various directions. I believe what is fundamental is to clarify the content of those initiatives. I believe that the conditions for success is that it should be a political initiative. We are not at the stage of technical points. We still do not have the conditions for the final collapse of the coup, so we do not need technical points. We need a roadmap of a political nature based on a principal political point, which we have reached in the National Salvation Front, which we announced following the failed elections by proposing early presidential elections. This is an idea based on the democratic rights. The country has two options. One of into which Kais Saied is leading an arbitrary and destructive path, and another path which is supported by a great number of Tunisians who oppose Kais Saied. And the question is how to give Tunisians back the right to determine their fate. And we believe it is the right of Tunisians to decide their own fate and not to remain as spectators in this crisis. We need a political roadmap. In 1 minute, I will summarize. It should be a national roadmap rather than a sectarian one. It should be based on the common national ground, bringing together all national forces, and should not be divisive. It should be based on what is common rather than exclusionary. It should aim for the resumption of the political process rather than saving the coup or improving the conditions of its continuity. I would have liked to talk about the role of institutions and the possibility of uniting the opposition, but I know that there is no time. We still have half an hour for questions and answers, and you will then have an opportunity to answer the rest of the questions. We now go to Dr. Khaled Chouket. You and your organization have been overseeing a dialogue between parties and political actors. If you can give us an idea about the and what you have reached and how do you view the way out of this crisis? Thank you, Dr. Radwan, for this opportunity, and I'm happy to talk to everyone and meet the friends who spoke before me, who are companions on the path of the struggle for democracy. The Institute for Democracy has organized a number of dialogues, around 12 meetings between 6th of October and 15th of December, in which around 80 political figures have participated, representing the whole political spectrum, and also from civil society, including former ministers, leaders in various political parties and civil society organizations, as well as academics and intellectuals. We sought to play a complementary role with the struggle of those on the ground, which have been led by parties and initiatives like Citizens Against the Coup and the National Salvation Front, which we greatly respect, and national organizations that have given priority to action on the ground, which is a very important aspect in giving direct political messages. The aim of these dialogues was to respond to the calls or messages which we believe that the Tunisian people have given and some political elites have sent in trying to understand why the coup took place. Is there an evaluation of the decade of the democratic transition in its weaknesses and strengths, and contributing to elaborating a future alternative that can be the basis for a civilizational national project to help those forces, concerned parties, particularly since it is the responsibility of political and civil forces that were engaged in the democratic transition and which contributed to, over the last 10 years, to this experience, to, through a written document, to reach an evaluation and a future vision, because we are convinced that this coup is only a temporary phase and that the democratic transition was not a coincidence, but was the result of the struggle of generations of Tunisians over decades, and that the 17th of December 2010 to 214 January 2011 was the culmination of a long process where many lives were sacrificed, where there was a lot of confrontations and battles and pain, out of this conviction that we will return, that Tunisians will take their country back to the natural path of the democratic transition and will resume the democratic transition in order to establish a stable democracy that can play its role also in the Arab region, because it is not only restricted to Tunisia, but also applies to the region to which it belongs, and in which Tunisia, despite its small size as a country, where Tunisia has always had a significant fundamental influence in the Arab Islamic mind and in its development. So I go back to the questions you have posed briefly. And before that, I wish to remind that these meetings we have been organizing will be concluded in a conference which will be held on the 25th and 26th of January, where we will present a number of the conclusions we have reached by the friends who have taken part in these meetings. And we hope that it will be a moment for producing an important document in relation to the issue of the Tunisian people determining their democratic future. Concerning whether or not the coup has ended, I say that the coup against the democratic transition, for me, may not be over, because the leader of the coup is still in his post, but politically and intellectually, I think it has ended, and very quickly. If we go back to the narrative that it was based on, that a coup of this nature came with a narrative that is based on a number of elements which justified this illegal act against the democratic elected institutions. 5 points briefly on which this narrative is based. The nostalgia of a strong president who will replace the petty elites and institutions who will take quick decisions as opposed to the decisions of democratic institutions that operate slowly. The second element is that image of parliament and the democratic government and the political elite in general, this demonized image which he worked on nationally and internationally, which he mentions many times in his speeches. Third is the social and economic crisis that was the result of political instability as well as the pandemic. And the fourth point in these founding myths of the coup was fighting corruption. And the fifth point was the question of national sovereignty, which had been allegedly weakened because of the democratic system. These 5 myths, it has become clear to the Tunisian people in a brief time that they are false and deceptive and not true. First, the president who took all powers in his hand, as had never been done by any Tunisian president within centralized presidential systems. Neither Bourguiba nor Ben Ali had as many powers as this man. Nevertheless, he has failed, as my colleagues have mentioned, to deal with any problem. He himself continues to ask innocently. He goes around at night and asks, where are goods, basic goods, foods, and why have they disappeared? You have all powers and you cannot answer these questions. So who would be able to answer those questions? So it has become clear to the Tunisian people that this power grab and having a sultanic president above all institutions is a deception, an unprecedented illusion. And these months have proven that this has nothing to do with the question of separating powers or gathering them. Secondly, regarding the image of parliament that has been demonized, I think the Tunisian people are discovering the truth of those plots and conspiracies of what had been plotted against parliament and all the resources put at the service in order to misrepresent and demonize parliament. The economic and social crisis, it has become clear that the worst performing government over the last 10 years was better than the government formed by this president in the face of the social and economic crisis, despite the fact that we are not fully satisfied with the performance of the democratic elected governments over the last 10 years. We believe that this, among the weaknesses of the decade is this question, not giving enough importance to economic development and given higher priority to other questions which harmed to a great extent the democratic transition, and given reasons to justify the abortion of the democratic process. It has become clear to Tunisians after all these commissions announced by the president to look into Tunisia's debt and all his announcements of financial reconciliation, and it has become clear that it was all a lie. Tunisia is not free of corruption, but it has the least level of corruption in the Arab region, as so this exaggerated a question of corruption. It will become clearer daily that this was only used by Kais Saied. This man who has taken all powers, can he preserve better national sovereignty? It is sufficient for us to say that for him to be welcomed in Brussels in that manner and in Washington in that manner is something that is demeaning to Tunisians, where he looked as a weak president, condemned by everyone because of by usurping powers and writing his own constitution and restricting freedoms, because we continue to say that the most powerful ruler is the democratic ruler. He would be stronger in the face of any external pressures, who is supported by real legitimacy, who would not be scared of any bringing up of any questions of freedoms or human rights, to be accused and having to defend himself through weak and unconvincing arguments. That's why I say that Tunisian sovereignty has never faced a weaker level than we are witnessing today. I conclude in 3 points. I see the Tunisian opposition, and I am part of it, through a lot of appreciation, and I consider them to be responsible despite their diversity, but they are at the same time united. There is no one within the real opposition who supports the coup. Everyone is calling for a return to democratic legitimacy, and the opposition is responsible because they have chosen to put the national interest above other considerations. And this is what I heard during my visits to Arab countries and others. We in the opposition have not gone for a zero-sum game or pushed the country towards the unknown or towards chaos. We are committed to peaceful, civic, civilized action, despite the fact that that will require more time and greater sacrifices. But this demonstrates responsibility in this critical time, where for the first time in our history, where there is now a clear distinction between those who are with democracy and those who support the coup against democracy. Regarding the institutions, of the army and the security forces. They are part of Tunisian society, and I do not believe that they are able to go above or away from the state of the Tunisian people. Some of the leaders of the army or officers believed that the blockage we faced in 2020 and beginning of 2021 could only be unblocked through this way. Perhaps some of them had wrong evaluations, and I believe that they will benefit from this experience to become more disciplined institutions in the future. And perhaps the most important example is the question of security unions. I have noticed in the statements of security unions that they are now praising the privileges and reforms achieved over the last decades, and their fear of losing those achievements as a result of the coup. Regarding our friends in the international community, in the US and the EU, all we ask for is to have harmony and coherence with universal values of democracy. We are very sensitive to double standards. So you might have a strong statement against the coup in Peru, against democratic institutions, something great, but we want consistent statements wherever democracy is threatened, whether it is in Tunisia or Asia or Latin America. It does not matter. We should have consistent positions because we believe that common interests between us cannot be preserved except in this way. I believe that the best to cooperate with and the best who would guarantee common interests between us is the democratic system and not the centralized authoritarian presidentialist system that brings back memories of the past, because dictators cannot guarantee anything. They just fulfill their role temporarily, but we want continuity, we want permanence in international relations, and sustainability can only be guaranteed by democracy. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Khalid. We have 20 minutes. We'll try to be brief as much as possible because we have a great number of questions. In your view, what is the percentage of the Tunisian people that opposes the coup and the percentage that still supports the coup or supports what was done by Kais Saied on the 25th of July? Do you have any estimates of the percentage of support and opposition among the Tunisian people? the only mechanism to measure the level of support or opposition of the Tunisian people. We don't have very accurate polls. We have elections that were called for by Kais Saied, in which 8.8% of Tunisians took part, which means that over 9% of Tunisians have withdrawn their support from this path. I do not say that 90% are with the opposition or accept the proposals of the opposition, but clearly over 90% of the people have given up on and expressed their disappointment with the coup. And this is something to be accepted by Kais Saied and his electoral commission. And this demonstrates the possibilities for the opposition, which it should deal with maturely and wisely and responsibly to end this coup. I have something to add to what Mr. Aysam has said, which is the objective, the results of the referendum and the consultation and the first round of the elections prove that this coup has no popular support and that its support is reducing. But what is important is to remind people that many forces or elites that had expressed their support, the absolute support of what they called the corrective path of the 25th of July, are retreating one by one, and there are no significant, credible, trustworthy figures who are explicitly expressing their support. What about the role of the UGTT? It seems that the managing committee has said that it will not call for any dialogue. It will not call to its dialogue, invite anyone who considers the 25th of July to be a coup. I personally know that is not accurate. That is not accurate. That was only the statement of a member of the managing committee. It is not the decision of the managing committee. It is a statement of a member of the executive committee of the UGTT. And this person is known. He is known to be part of the ideological wing of the union who support Kais Saied. So it is a personal position. It can be part of attempts, part of internal balances of the union and attempts to put pressure, but we believe that it does not represent the official position. It was not announced by the spokesperson or the Secretary General. Briefly, I want to say that the role, the function of the dialogue, because to duplicate past dialogues is not possible because of different contexts. Dialogue should be the role of political parties, principally because these organizations, despite our respect for their historical role, their leaders disagree. Their leaders in 2013 and 2014 are not the same leaders today. Their positions have also affected their image and their ability to manage a dialogue which can lead to the required results. I believe that political parties must play a fundamental role because the battle this time is a battle for democracy rather than any other nature, and it requires a fundamental role for political parties because they are the target. Do you believe? Can I add something? Do you still consider UGTT to be a partner in the restoration of democracy, or is it a supporter of the coup? Do you have a position on the role of the UGTT in the coming phase? How do you expect its role to be? Before that, when a member of the executive committee says that he will not, and the UGTT will not enter into dialogue with any party that considers the 25th of July to be a coup, that means he will not enter into dialogue with anyone, because almost all important political forces consider what happened on the 25th of July to be a coup. If you talk about the National Salvation Front, affair, the 5 social democratic parties, Abir Moussi's party, from the extreme right to the extreme left, all consider what happened to be a coup. The second point is that democratic opposition forces resisting the coup are the ones that will not enter into dialogue with anyone who presents a proposal that is within the framework of the 25th of July aimed at saving the coup. Our position in the NSF is that we will not, even if we are invited to such a dialogue, we will not engage into any initiative aimed at improving Kais Saied's image and the coup's image. Regarding your question about whether the UGTT is still a partner in the democratic process, I believe that the role of the union has been undermined in the last few years. As people have spoken before me about the change in the leadership and its convictions in democracy, but we still hope in all cases that democracy will be stronger when it is supported by the union and other unions and civil society. However, many parties, civil society organizations, figures who support democracy, it would be better for democracy. Democracy would be weaker without the UGTT and would be stronger with the UGTT. In reality, we always asked about the role of the UGTT, and this is because of the important contribution of the UGTT in 2013 to manage the dialogue at that time. But it seems that it's not the same situation, because the UGTT with the other 3 members of the quartet who had led the national dialogue in 20 should have been, at the time, they were neutral and they facilitated the political dialogue between political parties in 2013. But today, what has happened is completely different. Yes, the leadership has changed, and the position and of the UGTT, which we had expected to be objective and neutral on what took place, there is change this time. Since the 25th of July, the union has been one of those who rushed to accept what happened and who described it as a correction of the democratic path that should have happened. Until today, we do not see any significant change. There is change in its relation with government. It has escalated its statements because it is a failed government. But these accusations of failure should have been directed towards the one who has appointed and controls the government, because we all know that this government has no independent decision-making or vision. It is the president's government which applies his orders. So in terms of the UGTT's position, we do not see its position to have evolved much. And the call of some of its leaders, we believe they are rejected by some of the political parties. I believe that the UGTT, despite everything, which were not all positive, will continue be a significant organization in determining the country's future, and it is in the interest of all democratic parties to maintain good links with the UGTT. Yes, there are unclear positions from the party that we would have wished the union should have stood with democracy and the constitution, and should have been among at the foremost of those calling for the restoration of democracy. I say that even if some leaders send messages to Kais Saied, he does not accept any messages. He only issues orders. He does not receive any messages. The UGTT will be a target of the coup. Yesterday, the president receiving the head of a rival union is a message to the UGTT that it will be a target in the future. The union should either give its fate and sacrifice its role, sacrifice Tunisia's future and that of workers, or to end its illusions and assume its responsibility. But we as political parties and democratic forces have an important role by unifying our stance, by putting forward a united initiative. This might push the UGTT to go beyond the divided statements of some of its leaders. Political parties should work with the UGTT in order to work together. There is no interest in hostility to the UGTT, but this will only weaken us. This is what this unity among political parties is what might justify the continuity of this weak and ambiguous position of the UGTT. The next question is about the relationship with Algeria and France. We all agree that these two countries have significant influence on the situation in Tunisia. Have you thought, as organizations or parties, about contacting decision makers in Algeria or France to convince them to change their position and support democracy in Tunisia? Have there been any attempts in this direction? We have not complained. You want us to be accused of calling for foreign intervention? I am only joking. Algeria has always had an important historical role. We consider ourselves and Algeria to be one nation. We have gone through the same history, the same plights and same colonization, and fate wished for us to have the common colonizer, and we supported them during their independence war, and we hosted the leaders and fighters of the independence war, and Tunisian blood was shed in defense of Algerian independence fighters, out of our awareness that whatever happens in the region matters to all of us. Perhaps what Algeria's position has been supportive of the coup. At other times, there were expressions of concern about the situation in Tunisia. We say that we rely on on Algeria's wisdom that should realize that Tunisia as a democracy is better for Algeria than an isolated Tunisian dictatorship. Of course, as parties, there is contact, and also with intellectual groups. We are in contact with our Algerian counterparts. Of course, dealing at the official level is complicated, and we hope that whatever threatens the Tunisian people, the Algerian people would be there to support the Tunisian people. With France, also, it is complicated. We did not see a clear position until, which was the same before the revolution, until the 12th of January 2011. Perhaps they are waiting to see how the balance of powers develops. We know that France always wished to have one party to deal with. Perhaps having a diverse democracy may be a problem because of new alternatives and options for Tunisia. Perhaps this might be a matter of concern for some countries, but we rely on trends of democracy all over the world. I believe that the official, because also in France there's diversity, we used to think that Macron represented a new generation in France that thinks differently. And during his election campaign, he promised to apologize for the crimes of occupation in Tunisia, Algeria, and African countries. However, unfortunately, it seems to me that President Macron, particularly after his statement during the Francophone summit in Tunisia, it seems that he has retreated back to that political colonial mentality which dominates in some decision-making circles in France. In his dealing with the supremacy, with that superior tone, where he is talking about Tunisia as one of their colonies. Hence, I personally believe that this crisis, this plight that our democracy is living through, it is linked to another struggle which may be broader, which is the struggle for completing our independence, because it has become clear that our independence was not complete, and that that democracy should complete it. In relation to Algeria, I believe that we are two nations that share the same ambitions and aspirations. The protest movement in Algeria that called for democracy demonstrate the Algerian people's aspiration to have a political system that is democratic, where the people say elections. And I say that our struggle at all levels is the same. I meet a lot of Algerian friends from various political backgrounds in various occasions, Arab gatherings, and I'm aware of the fact that they aspire to the same aspirations, and that the struggle of the whole region is one, and that the evil that befell Tunisia is because of some regimes in the region that wanted to end Tunisian democracy. So our struggle is complex. It's not a local, restricted struggle, and anyone who believes he is able to convince dictatorships that our democracy will not export its democracy. So please do not try to undermine us, will be wrong, because our struggle in the Arab and Muslim world is one. It is against dictatorship and for democracy. Mr. Issam, do you have anything to add on this point? I believe that Algeria, until now, has stayed above interference in Tunisia, and I do not ask for anything more than that, because we are very conscious of the depth of relations between the two people, and that there is no interest for Algeria or for us, for Algeria to intervene. We should maintain our positive, bright, historical relations. About France, I think France has not learned from its past experiment and still believes that its interests are protected by any regime in place. And as Mrs. Samira said, reminds us of France's support for Ben Ali during the revolution and its provision of tear gas and other arms used against the Tunisian people. France is facing a retreat of its presence and influence in Africa, but it is still dealing with us using a colonial mentality and wishes to maintain a hegemonic approach, and still considers us as not eligible for democracy and as nations that could enjoy sovereignty, because they believe that their interests and because they believe that their relations with its former colonies are not balanced. I think we have reached the end of our seminar because we have gone over our time by 20 minutes. Thanks to the very valuable contributions and very important questions. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your